This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. What is happening unfolds quietly, methodically, and almost invisibly, not in daylight, not on television, but in the gaps, in the moments when systems stop reporting and start enforcing. There are nights when a government does not argue with its people. It counts them. There are moments when silence is not the absence of information, but the presence of intent. And once that switch is flipped, it rarely flips back. You are told this is about unrest, about order, about control. But that framing misses the danger entirely. Because the real story isn't what is being done. It's how easily it is being done, and how many systems quietly accept it as normal. Stay with me. Not because this is shocking, but because if you look away too early, you will miss the part that actually matters. And the next piece is where the mechanism comes into focus. What actually controls a system like this is not ideology, not charisma, not even fear. It is infrastructure. Control flows through switches, permissions, chains that decide who speaks, who moves, who is seen. When those switches flip, the argument is already over. What follows looks chaotic, but it is not. Power here does not announce itself. It withdraws visibility. It narrows information. It replaces public accountability with internal command. You are meant to think this is a clash between a state and its people. It is not. It is a test of whether a modern government can temporarily turn itself into a closed system, and whether anyone can stop it once it does. Because once reporting stops, once verification collapses, violence no longer needs justification. It only needs authorization. And authorization in this system moves quietly, downward, efficiently, without debate. This is why the most important shift didn't happen in the streets. It happened elsewhere, earlier, and almost no one noticed. That shift is where we go next. For a long time, repression looked loud, visible, messy. You could point to it, you could film it, you could name it. That is no longer the case. The most important change happened slowly, under the cover of temporary measures. Security became administrative, violence became procedural, silence became policy. There was a time when unrest produced negotiations, statements, concessions. Now it produces outages, blackouts, gaps where information used to live. Before, the system reacted after the streets moved. Now the system moves first. Connectivity disappears, verification collapses, witnesses are isolated from each other. And in that vacuum, the threshold for force quietly drops. This is the most dangerous kind of change. Not dramatic, not declared, normalized. Because when people lose the ability to see each other's reality, resistance fragments, fear becomes individualized, and enforcement no longer needs spectacle. It only needs time. What looks like chaos is actually refinement, a more efficient version of control. And the first visible crack appears not as a theory, but as a shock. That's where this turns concrete. The first shock did not arrive as a headline. It arrived as a pattern. Doctors noticed it first. Not speeches, not crowds, wounds. Earlier injuries were survivable. Pellets, blunt trauma, crowd control damage. Then, abruptly, that changed. Late at night, during a total communications blackout, hospitals began receiving bodies with a different signature. High-velocity wounds, military-grade damage, the kind you don't see in civilian unrest. Operating rooms filled faster than staff could rotate, then faster than records could be kept. Then faster than bodies could be processed at all. This wasn't escalation by accident. It followed a sequence. Police withdrew, other units moved in, orders shifted. What matters here is not the brutality, it's the timing. The violence peaked precisely when visibility dropped to zero, when documentation became impossible, when the outside world went blind. That is not panic, that is design. And once a system proves it can do this once, the question is no longer if it will do it again. It's how much it learns from the first time. If this is unsettling, stay with me, because the mechanism behind this is even colder. What makes this system work is not secrecy alone. It is distribution. Responsibility is fragmented. Orders are layered. Each unit knows only enough to act, never enough to answer. At the top, decisions are abstract. Stability, containment, risk management. Below that, directives become operational. Restore control, clear zones, neutralize movement. At the bottom, it becomes physical, trigger pressure, body counts, Silence. No single actor carries the full moral weight. Everyone carries a piece. That is how damage scales without accountability. Those who benefit are not the ones pulling triggers. They are the ones buying time, preserving leverage, signaling strength to allies and rivals alike. The cost is absorbed elsewhere, by families searching hospitals without records, by doctors choosing between treatment and testimony, by citizens who suddenly understand that legality has been replaced by permission. And here's the part that matters most. Once this mechanism is proven effective internally, it becomes reusable, not just against protests, against anything framed as instability. The system doesn't calm down after this. It calibrates. And that calibration produces the second shock. This one moves faster. The second shock doesn't arrive with explanation. It arrives with speed. Arrests multiply faster than names can be recorded. Detentions happen without paperwork. People vanish into administrative space. Language shifts. Protesters are no longer citizens. They are reclassified, enemies, threats, categories that remove the need for process. Once that line is crossed, timelines collapse. There is no investigation phase, no delay, no visibility. Decisions are compressed. Judgment is expedited. Outcomes are preloaded. This is escalation without announcement, a system testing how far it can move before external pressure meaningfully responds. And here is the critical point. The violence in the streets is no longer the primary signal. The signal is procedural acceleration, how quickly the system converts dissent into a terminal status. Because once that conversion is normalized, the deterrent is no longer fear of injury. It is fear of erasure. And erasure does not need crowds. It does not need cameras. It only needs compliance from the machinery. This is where the danger stops being episodic. It becomes structural. And that structure now reaches you, whether you realize it yet or not. This is the point where distance collapses, because what this system does next is not abstract. It is not theoretical. It is lived. You feel it when information disappears mid-sentence, when a name you were following stops updating, when a familiar voice goes silent and no explanation replaces it. You are forced to decide what silence means. Did they stop speaking, or were they stopped? And here is the quiet damage. You begin to self-edit. Not because you are told to, but because the system has demonstrated consequences without having to repeat them. That is how repression scales without expanding force. The lesson travels faster than the violence ever could. This is why the families matter, the funerals, the bans, not as tragedy, but as signal suppression. Grief becomes dangerous because it gathers people. Memory becomes dangerous because it preserves evidence. So the system intervenes. Not loudly, administratively. If you're still watching, don't look away now. This is where the story stops being local, because once a system proves this can work internally, others start taking notes, and they already have. What happens next is not solidarity, it is calculation. Other governments do not respond first to suffering. They respond to instability, to risk, to spillover. Statements are issued, carefully worded, concern without commitment, condemnation without consequence. What matters is not what is said publicly. It's what changes quietly. Markets adjust. Energy routes are reevaluated. Alliances test their language. Military assets become more active, not deployed, just positioned. This is how a domestic crisis becomes an international variable. Some actors see leverage, others see exposure, and a few see precedent. Because if a state can suspend visibility, compress justice, and absorb internal violence without immediate external cost, that changes the rules. It suggests a new threshold, one where sovereignty shields almost anything, as long as it is fast, opaque, and framed as internal security. And once that threshold moves, it doesn't move back easily. No one is sure yet how far this will travel, only that it already has. Which brings us to what happens next, not as prediction, but as trajectory. And this is where the future stops being hypothetical. From here, the system branches, not into certainty, into trajectories. The first path looks like adjustment. Pressure accumulates just enough to force cosmetic change. Controls loosen selectively. Visibility returns in fragments. The mechanism survives, slightly modified, more careful next time. The second path is erosion. Violence remains internal, but legitimacy leaks. Defections increase. Information escapes in pieces. The system still functions, but every action costs more than the last. Repression becomes heavier because consent no longer carries weight. Then there is the third path, rupture. This is not collapse from protest alone. It is collapse from miscalculation, from assuming the blackout holds, from assuming allies stay silent, from assuming fear always scales faster than anger. Rupture happens when acceleration outruns control, when enforcement creates more instability than it suppresses. When internal mechanisms trigger external consequences they were never designed to absorb. None of these paths are clean. None are guaranteed. And here is the most important part. The system does not choose consciously between them. It follows momentum. It responds to the last pressure applied, not the next one coming. Which is why what happens after this matters more than what has already happened, and why the final warning does not come with answers. It comes with stakes. There is a temptation at this point to look for reassurance, for closure, for a signal that someone, somewhere, has control of this. You should resist that instinct, because the most dangerous systems are not the ones that announce themselves as cruel. They are the ones that demonstrate efficiency under pressure and are quietly rewarded for it. What you have watched unfold is not just about repression, it is about proof of concept. Proof that visibility can be switched off, that legality can be compressed, that mass harm can occur inside a modern state while the world debates language. And once that proof exists, it does not stay contained. It circulates. It gets studied. It gets refined. The question is no longer whether this ends. It is what lessons survive it. If you stop here, you miss the most important part. Not what this system did, but what others now know they can do. Stay with this. Follow the next step. Because the danger is not behind us. It's ahead.